Listen. Before our story becomes cold water and broken steel, it is only a sound hammers in Belfast, a whistle in Southampton, a spoon gently laid upon porcelain. We think we know the ending. We always think we know the ending. But history is not a headline. It is breath, choices, and the quiet arithmetic of minutes. This film is an educational exploration of the RMS Titanic, a journey through ambition and engineering, class and courage, error and endurance. No shock for shock's sake, no sensationalism, just a careful walk through the night the 20th century learned how fragile its confidence could be. We will board with the crowd and smell the coal and beeswax, move through the carved wood and velvet to the places where maps turn into corridors, and corridors into decisions. We'll sit with the captain and the wireless operators as warnings stack up like unopened letters. We'll listen for the scrape that isn't a roar, but a sentence. We'll stand at the rail as boats rise and fall in the dark, and we'll ride out the long hours when the sea keeps its own counsel. Then we'll follow the rescue ship into the gray New York, into its stunned silence, and the cameras decades later down to the wreck, where rust grows like winter and shoes remember what the ocean has erased. Along the way, expect detail, the rivet that holds until it doesn't, the corridor gate that opens too slowly, the band that keeps time when time won't keep itself. Expect questions we can only answer with better questions. What do we owe each other when systems fail? What is the cost of elegance when margin is thin? Which promises feel unsinkable in our own age, and why do we believe them? This is a story about a ship, yes, but it's also a mirror for modern life, bandwidth and bottlenecks, leadership and labor, myth and memory. You'll hear the quiet heroism, the engineers in heat, the stewards with blankets, the women who rowed, and the stubborn myths that simplify what should not be simple. We'll treat the wreck with respect, the facts with precision, and the people with the dignity they earned. If you are watching to fall asleep, let the rhythm of engines and oars carry you. If you are watching to wake up to history, to the way safety is built and unbuilt, stay close. We'll cross together. And when the ending arrives, as endings do, we will not look away. We will make it mean something. This program is presented for historical and educational purposes. Viewer discretion is simply compassion for the living who remember and the dead who cannot correct us. Ready? Step aboard. Mind the gap between certainty and the sea. Chapter 1. The Dream of Unsinkable Glory. Listen, before any cold Atlantic night, before any SOS pulsed through the dark, there was a noise that sounded like progress itself. Hammers striking hot rivets. Steam hissing from valves. The clatter of carts and the barked orders of foremen rolling over Belfast like distant thunder. If you had stood along Queen's Road in the first decade of the 20th century, you'd have watched a skeleton of steel rise out of rain and salt air, ribs curving toward the sky as if some iron leviathan had beached itself and decided, stubbornly, to become a palace. History remembers the ending. But beginnings have their own music. A world that began to run on confidence. The age into which Titanic was sketched believed in straight lines and bigger numbers. Bridges were longer, buildings higher, engines stronger. If it could be measured, it could be conquered. Across the North Atlantic, two shipping empires, Cunard and White Star, were locked in an arms race that measured prestige in knots, tonnage, and chandelier wattage. Cunard had speed, sleek greyhounds hurling mail and millionaires across the sea in record time. White Star, more cautious and cunning, chose another tactic: enormity plus opulence. If you can't outrun your rival, outshine him. That choice would demand a stage large enough to be felt on the far side of the ocean. Belfast obliged. Harland and Wolff's shipyard spread like a republic of cranes and scaffolds, its skylines stitched together by gantries of riveted iron. The city's mornings smelled of rain and coal smoke, its evenings of wet rope and yeast from the breweries upriver. Men in flat caps streamed through the yard gates by the thousands, lunch pails thumping their thighs, hands already grimy with yesterday. We speak of Titanic as if she were inevitable. She wasn't. She was a decision. Paper dreams, human hands. In a boardroom lit by winter sunlight, ink scratched over paper that would become steel. Officials from the White Star Line met with shipwrights whose minds could translate adjectives grandest, safest, most luxurious into frame numbers, plate thicknesses, and the calculus of buoyancy. On one side sat the men of money and reputation, on the other, men of drafts and slide rules. Between them, a promise, a trio of sisters, each vaster than any ship afloat. The world would know their names: Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic, because they were designed to be known. You can draw a ship with a pencil. You build it with 1,000 throats shouting, "Heave!" and 10,000 wrists blistered raw. Consider the riveter, a white-hot metal button pinched from a brazier with tongs, tossed up a ladder to a catcher in leather gauntlets who plunges it through the overlapping plates before its heat bleeds away. One man braces a heavy dolly inside, another drives the head flat with a hammer outside. Each strike rings through the hull like a bell tolling for a city that has not yet lived. Pause with me here. We love destiny in our stories, the sense that this ship could only end one way. But destinies are built from very particular, very human choices. Long before any iceberg, choices were being riveted shut. The Cathedral of Steel. Rising in her slip, Titanic became less a ship than a statement. Her keel ran like a boulevard, and her bulkheads grew into a honeycomb of chambers meant to contain the unthinkable. Watertight. The word murmured at meetings like a spell. Watertight compartments, electric doors that could seal in an instant, a double bottom another spell. The vocabulary of safety soothed and sold. Brochures breathed adjectives, unsinkable, practically. The qualifiers tended to fall away when retold over dinner. To step into her skeleton even before the plating was complete was to enter a cathedral of industry. The air tasted metallic. Sawdust clung to the sweat on your upper lip. Below, boilers sat like squat iron giants waiting for fire. Above, decks stretched away into vanishing point. Any shipwright could tell you a vessel this big would move the world around it. Even tied to the quay, it would rearrange the river's current, the wind's habits, the city's pride. And because a floating city demands a philosophy, Designers supplied one, progress with velvet gloves. First class would walk on Axminster carpets and sleep beneath coffered ceilings. Second class would discover, with mild surprise, that their accommodations looked suspiciously like a minor lord's townhouse. Third class would find cleanliness, light, and dignity rare on cheaper lines. The Titanic would not simply carry lives across water, she would convince her passengers that they belonged to a story of ascent. Do you feel the seduction? It's important that you do. If we reduce the beginning to blueprints and payrolls, we miss why people believed. And they did believe. The theater of the slipway. Launch day is a ritual. Even half-finished, a ship acquires a presence that compels turnout. Belfast lined the quays and rooftops. Mothers hoisted children on their hips. Newspapers hustled out extra editions. A bottle cracked on the bows. Grease lay thick on the timbers to ease the hull's first slide. And when the blocks were cut away, a hush fell, the hush that always falls before a large object decides to move. Then she moved. There is a specific groan a hull makes when it shifts from land to river, a deep-bellied yawp that belongs somewhere between animal and earthquake. Chains spat spray. Tugboats fussed and bucked like terriers around a sleeping bull. In the crowd, hats flew up. In the yard, foremen permitted themselves thin smiles. The city had pushed a mountain and watched it float. I want you to notice something in this noise: pride. Not abstract, patriotic pride, the intimate pride of the hand and the eye. Men who fitted a staircase banister to its curve with the certainty that fingertips would glide over it in evening gloves. Women who stitched napery, knowing its weight, would anchor a table as steady as any oath. When people later claimed the ship couldn't sink, they weren't only quoting advertisements. They were defending their craft. The opposite of tragedy isn't comedy, it's competence. Belfast had that in spades. Rivalry as destiny. Across the water, Cunard read the papers with narrowed eyes. Their greyhounds still owned the speed records, but speed is a lonely virtue if your competitor sweeps up the poets, princes, and financiers. Thus, the rivalry sharpened. If the sea were a chessboard, White Star had placed a queen in the center and dared anyone to try her. But rivalry is also a kind of overheating. You push a boiler hard to win the timetable, and your gauges tick a little higher than comfortable. You add another tier of sweets, because the Duke of whoever likes a certain pattern of light through a certain pattern of glass, and your weight grows. Your head sits heavier on your shoulders. You tell yourself the design is robust. Of course it is, but the bravado, if left unexamined, hardens into dogma. We will see, later, how dogma behaves under stress. For now, the world applauded. Owners posed for photographs. Editors waxed operatic. Shipping clerks penciled in lists of names that would one day be carved in stone. The economy of dreams. Titanic was not only an engineering feat, she was a balance sheet shaped like a ship. Investors wanted returns. The transatlantic trade wanted theater. Immigration wanted gigatons of space. Coal merchants wanted a customer that consumed mountains by the week. Tailors wanted a new season of suits for the gentleman who would promenade her decks. A ship this grand sits at the center of a web of desire. Consider the cabins as banknotes, suites priced to skim cream off the richest currents, staterooms priced to catch the broad midstream, bunks priced for the great human river flowing toward America. Consider, too, the public rooms as arguments. The smoking room's paneling says, "We are English, even at sea." The Turkish bath says, "We are cosmopolitan, even at sea." The grand staircase says, "We are ascending," which meant, of course, that some would rise, and others would watch them rise. Am I editorializing? A little. But the staircase matters. Architecture is choreography. Where we put our stairs, we put our hopes. Safety, sold and believed. Let's speak of unsinkable. Did anyone in a drawing office write those syllables as a literal claim? No. Marketing wrote, practically unsinkable, a hedge that civilized men with cigars rounded off when it met brandy. But beyond slogans, the design genuinely sought safety. 16 main compartments divided by bulkheads, doors that could be closed remotely, a double bottom girding the keel. Naval architecture had learned from past wrecks. Each disaster before had become a line item in a ledger of lessons. Yet even in safety, there are compromises. Bulkheads rose high, but not all the way to the main deck. Why? Because a mansion desires continuity. You do not want a corridor terminated by a wall of steel where a gilt arch might be. Aesthetics trims safety's corners, the way a tailor shapes a generous coat to flatter a patron's stomach. No single choice doomed anything. A series of sensible choices under a crown of confidence can become a kind of fate. It's tempting to scold them with hindsight. Better to observe them with sympathy. They didn't think they were building a tragedy. They thought they were building the safest, most beautiful thing afloat, and in many respects, they were right. The people who would carry it forward. Names gather around a project like this. The designer, whose eyes could see through steel to stress lines and load paths. The chairman, whose chin pointed like a prow at photographers. The captain admired for never raising his voice. The officer whose pencil was always sharp. The purser who could memorize 200 names by Tuesday. But a ship is also the baker who perfected a roll that crackled delicately when torn. The musician who tried a waltz in the empty saloon to test the room's timbre. The steward who learned which children hid behind which potted palms when asked to go to bed. If you want to understand how a thing lives, look at the unrecorded gestures around it. The brushstrokes on a sign that read, "Ladies' Boudoir." The seamstress checking a hemline's fall in a corridor, while a plumber whistles in the next compartment. The coal trimmer wiping his forehead with a sleeve blackened, indistinguishable from night. All of them believed they were making a place people would love. They were right about that, too. A ship acquires a soul. When does steel become a ship? Not at launch, not quite. Perhaps when the first human foot crosses the threshold, not as worker, but as passenger, and thinks, "This is mine for a little while." Perhaps earlier, when the first mirror is hung, and the first light strikes it, and multiplies into the suggestion of a story. Perhaps when the engines fire for the first time, and the deck trembles with a heartbeat that is not a metaphor, but a frequency you can feel in your knees. Stand with me in the empty dining saloon, before sea trials. White linen bleaches the room into a winter field. Cutlery lies in ranks, like tiny regiments. If you speak, the sound will drift up and flatten against plaster. If you breathe, you will smell wax and coal in a marriage that defines the era. The chairs await men who will discuss investments with the same gravity others reserve for scripture, and women who will read letters from Paris and pretend not to notice the glances they are accruing like interest. The orchestra will tune and pause and begin, and time itself will seem to fall into a graceful meter. Tell me you don't feel it. The seductive promise that life, for at least a crossing, can be curated into harmony. The sea, patient as ever. Outside the windows, the harbor water looks docile, green where it thins over mud, pewter where a cloud crosses. Ships are not born knowing oceans, they must be introduced. Sea trials are the first small conversations, how she answers the helm, how she stops, how her wake unrolls like a scroll writing itself behind her. Engineers read dials, the way physicians read pulses. A new ship always pretends to be obedient at first. The Atlantic smiles at such pretenses. It has time. It has always had time. Do I sound like I'm foreshadowing? I am. But not to hurry us. To ask you to notice the calm before any calamity, the ordinary competence, the everyday beauty, the human bustle. If we don't honor the ship as a triumph, we cannot understand the depth of the sorrow when triumph failed to save. A ticket to a future. When bookings opened, the ship transformed from object to itinerary. Names inked themselves into ledgers from Southampton to Cherbourg to Queenstown. In first class, industrialists and heiresses. In second, clerks and teachers. In third, families with eyes set like compasses toward America. Steerage trunks smelled of soap, apples, a shawl recently folded over a grandmother's shoulders. Louis Vuitton luggage smelled of leather and the self-assurance of inheritance. Babies would taste salt air for the first time. Widowers would cradle photographs in their coat pockets. A young man would carry a ring and rehearse a sentence he hadn't yet found the courage to speak. We use the phrase, passengers of fate, lazily, as if fate were a ticketing agent with a neat hand. Better to say they were passengers of their own hopes, boarding a vessel built from other people's hopes. That is how human ventures work, layered hopes, aligned long enough to become a thing you can touch. The last, best story progress could tell. Titanic's promise was not simply transport, it was narrative. Step aboard, and you were stepping into an argument about the future. That technology could civilize risk, that comfort could blunt uncertainty, that the modern world could, with enough polish and pressure, make even the Atlantic a corridor. The ship told this story so beautifully that people believed it with their whole chests. Perhaps you would have too. Perhaps you do about other things now, machines, systems, assurances delivered with such eloquence that doubt feels almost impolite. This is where I lean in and whisper, breaking the fourth wall, the way a steward might lean and murmur, "Tea, sir." Are we so different? We place our faith in engineered safety every day in aircraft, in algorithms, in medications, in the quiet assumption that because a thing is meticulously built, it is immune to the randomness we know still prowls the world. Titanic is not just a cautionary tale. It is a mirror held up to modern certainty. But do not let the mirror rob the scene of its warmth. On the eve of departure, lamps glowed in her windows like constellations rearranged into human geometry. The gangways waited. The carpets lay unwrinkled, the sheets crisp, the silver bright. Somewhere deep in her hull, a trimmer tucked his sandwich into a nook only he would ever find again. Somewhere high, a stewardess smoothed a bedspread and allowed herself a small smile at the neat perfection of it. A ship can be many things, a machine, an economy, a bet, a boast. For a moment, Titanic was also a dream that believed itself immune to waking. You and I know how mornings work. They arrive all the same. Chapter 2. Forged in Iron and Ego. Before a ship becomes a silhouette against the horizon, she is a riddle of measurements, tempers, and weather. She is also a promise made in boardrooms, paid for in blisters. Walk with me into the yard again, where the morning rain beads on steel like sweat, where gulls argue above stacks of plate, and where the day's first hammer blow cracks the fog like a pistol shot. If Chapter 1 was the dream, this is the work that kept the dream upright. The Republic of Cranes. Harland and Wolfe's kingdom didn't so much sit along Belfast's waterfront as occupy it with the confidence of empire. Gantries stepped across the slip like giant ladders laid against the sky. Stacks exhaled cold breath. The river rocked idly at its leash, as if impatient to haul something large. No one clocked in quietly. The shift arrived like weather, a tide of men with lunch pails and rolled caps, their boots speaking fluent mud. You could spot the trades at a glance. Caulkers smelled faintly of oakum and tar. Platers carried their measuring tapes like priests with rosaries. Riveters had that distant, sleep-deprived look of men whose work is timed to seconds and heat. Paper ruled, but hands governed. A draftsman's crisp line, frame 35 to frame 72 beams at 36-inch centers, translated here into the weight of an I-beam against your shoulder and the cumin hot sting of scale on your forearms. Blueprints, in their elegant certainty, never warned you how cold a plate feels before dawn, or how much the wind can push a sheet of steel the size of a ballroom. Progress is often narrated by names, owners, designers, captains. Give me, for a minute, the nameless. The boy who kept the rivet brazier fed, eyes watering in the radiant heat. The signalman who sent a quick snap of his flag, the language of cranes. The woman at the yard's edge who took in linen by the bolt to stitch tablecloths wide enough to cover a dining room like winter snowfall. Fire and strike. The way a hull goes together is almost percussive music. Mark, drill, countersink, present, heat, throw, catch, hold, strike. Hot rivets glowed like comets in miniature as they arced from brazier to catcher, who trapped them in a funnel of practice and nerve-rammed them through plate and frame, and held the dolly, while the gunman's hammer flattened the head with wet thunder. 5 men to a team, a ballet you felt through your ribs. A good crew could set thousands in a shift, each one cooling into a small permanence that nobody would ever see again. Hydraulic presses bullied the most stubborn joints. Sledgehammers argued with misalignments. Chalk lines and curses stitched the seams. The sound traveled into the city like weather reports. The ship is growing today. And ego? Oh, it was there. Not the cheap, loud kind, but the quiet, dangerous conviction that if you could make a thing big enough and precise enough, you'd put a leash on risk itself. The larger the frames rose, the more that certainty crystallized. You could taste it on your tongue metal, smoke and confidence. Rooms before they were rooms. Walk the skeleton down a corridor that was not yet a corridor, just a gap between webs of steel. Your boots ring on temporary grating. The air tastes of iron and rain. Someone has chalked palm room on a bulkhead, a joke or a prophecy. The ship has begun to invent herself in words long before velvet or palms arrive. The carpenters moved like monks through a forest of timber, coaxing staircases into grace and lining walls that would one day pretend to be a French chateau. You could measure progress by what the rooms began to smell like, Early on, it was all coal and hot steel. Then a sweetness bled in cut oak, varnish, new paint. Later, the hotel smells would arrive. Wax, citrus, starch. The best of everything. The yard was told. Not just a smoking room, but the smoking room London gossip would envy. Not a dining saloon, but a stage where silver and conversation would shine like dueling mirrors. If you wonder how hubris gets into a hull, it often walks in by way of upholstery. Weight, the arithmetic of confidence. Numbers anchor pride. Displacement in tons, horsepower in thousands, bulkheads in counts of 16. The conversation about safety was real diagrams of watertight compartments, power to close doors at a lever's pull, a double bottom like armor you could stand on. The word, unsinkable, never appeared in a sacred text, but it drifted the way nicknames do when people believe they've earned them. Compromise, however, is the quiet partner of every triumph. A bulkhead that stops short of the main deck because the promenade wants light and continuity. A decision to favor comfort here, aesthetics there, on the grounds that it would never come to that. None of it sinister, all of it human. And that's important. Villains make neat stories. Ordinary choices make history. From the quay, the hull's curves seemed inevitable, like the geometry of a whale. Inside, you saw the bargain space stolen from one room to lavish on another, inches argued over like territory. If you like your metaphors neat, the ship carried within it a map of what the age valued. Sea trials and the first heartbeat. The day the engines turned over for the first time, the ship shivered from keel to cowl. It's a private sensation, the first heartbeat of a machine. Engineers listen with their fingertips, feeling for a hitch in the rhythm the way a violinist hears an instrument tightened to pitch. Pistons sighed, shafts revolved, gauges climbed. The yard's whistles announced what anyone nearby could already feel in their knees. She lives. Out in Belfast Lough, the trials were a conversation with water. How are you on the helm? Pretty responsive. How do you stop? Persuade. How do you back? With less grace than forward, like anything proud. A hard turn hove the river up in green shoulders. The wake scribbled a signature the city would learn to recognize. The paperwork afterward was crisp with approval. Numbers performed their neat trick, turning a giant's temperament into tables that reassured owners and insurance men. A ship is never so rational as when she has just been measured. Luxury rehearsals. Workers stepped out and stewards stepped in. The mood of the vessel softened from clang to hush. Rooms rehearsed themselves. A steward practiced drawing curtains in one smooth sweep, a small piece of choreography that would later read as effortlessness. In the galley, a baker tested ovens with loaves that warmed the corridor like a promise. The orchestra tried waltzes in the dining saloon, listening for a note that hung oddly under a particular arch. Acoustics are as much furniture as chairs are. Third class. The immigrant deck's history forgets, until it remembers, glowed with white paint and washable hope. Clean bunks. Real ventilation. A dining room, not a trough. People who had seen steerage elsewhere took a breath and realized they would not be treated as cargo. Second class. Perennial middle children blinked in surprise at paneling nicer than their tickets suggested. First class was theater, unashamed of itself. And yet, below all that velvet, the same Atlantic waited. I don't say this to sneer at silk. I say it because I want you to hear two truths at once. The ship was genuinely magnificent, and magnificence can be a lullaby. The Catechism of Lifeboats. There's a question you're asking, even if you haven't formed it yet. What about the boats? The math was legal, more than legal, compliant, and tidy. Regulations lag behind innovation, the way law lags behind language. A vessel this size could, by rule, sail with boats for barely half of those aboard. More could have fit, davits could have held them. But boats clutter promenades. They speak of doubt. An ocean liner sells conviction. Drills were scheduled, paperwork initialed, responsibilities allocated. The boats themselves were solid, the crews competent, the assumptions comfortable. What could overwhelm a ship with 16 compartments? The question was asked, then set aside. If you're feeling the urge to shout back through time, congratulations, you are alive to the cruel advantage hindsight gives us. The men with pencils and the men with coal. Above decks, a final round of inspections, signatures, speeches. Below, a labor whose romance never quite catches the camera, bunkers swallowing coal by the ton. Trimmers flattening mountains into hills, then into an even ground from which firemen could feed the boilers. Black dust everywhere on teeth, in hair, in the folds of skin around the eyes, and a heat-like argument. Each shovel a note in a music very few passengers would ever hear. I want to lay this next to the brochures. The staircases glow and the bunkers glare, belong to the same story. A ship that promises smoothness is powered by friction somewhere. It always has been. It always will be. Pride, like a tide. We do not need a villain to explain pride. Pride is the natural weather of success. Belfast felt it in its joints. Owners felt it in their balance sheets. Passengers felt it before they ever stepped aboard. How else to explain the way some of them rehearsed their names as they imagined the purser's welcome? Welcome aboard, Mr. Music to any era. It isn't wrong to be proud. It is dangerous to be lulled by it. The thin place between those two truths is where tragedy finds room to work. Final fittings, final myths. On the quay, crates addressed to departments like characters in a novel: pantry, palm court, purser, surgery. Last-minute deliveries, flowers, cigars, cheeses. A gramophone record someone insisted would be needed by Thursday. Stencils named ports the ship would never see. The inevitable rumor, unsinkable, floated again because it was a better story than highly survivable, which is a mouthful and does not stir champagne. The captain walked her length, counting without counting. Officers compared notes. Stewards learned names and allergies. Engineers learned the small hesitations of each pump. Lovers met in doorways they pretended to discover accidentally. A small boy pressed his nose to a window, left a ghost of himself there that would last until someone with a cloth removed it. Do you feel how alive it all is? Good. Keep that with you. Departure as coronation. The last week was less like outfitting and more like theater in dress rehearsal. The ship wore flags, as if they were compliments. The quay massed into witnesses. Even the tugboats behaved like courtiers, fussing, bowing, clearing throats of smoke. A band somewhere tuned into a jaunty key. The river adjusted its posture. If you squinted, you could almost believe what the age wanted to believe. That human intention, stacked high enough and painted generously, could alter the deep facts of nature. That a ship could be not only a marvel, but a guarantee. We will not scold them for that. We will let them have their ceremony. Tomorrow we will follow them down the gangways and onto carpets that erase the memory of mud, past polished brass, that reflects our better profiles. For now, we will stand on the quay and feel the crowd's body heat on our back, and the river's chill on our face, and listen to the future's engines breathing for the very first time, like a creature surer of its strength. A dream has been forged, iron, effort, and ego annealed into something that floats. The tools are put away, the pencils, too. The next chapter belongs to those who will step aboard believing a ship can carry not just bodies over water, but certainty across doubt. Chapter 3: The Floating Palace. Morning comes to Southampton tasting of salt and coal. Gulls stitch white commas into a sky the color of pewter. And there she is, black hull, red bottom, cream superstructure, vast in a way the eye keeps trying to deny. People on the quay become punctuation marks against her syntax. If industry had a cathedral, this was its west front. A whistle rolls over the water like a summons. Luggage carts rattle. Ticket stubs tear. The gangways lift and lower like the breaths of some careful animal. You don't just board a ship like this, you cross a threshold where the ordinary agrees to behave for 5 days. First impressions and what they're meant to do. Step into the first-class entrance and the air shifts. The smell of the dock's tar, rope, fish gives way to beeswax, linen, a shy hint of perfume lingering from some stewardess who just passed. Light falls through a glazed dome and softens against warm wood. You're not at sea yet, but the sea is already contained. That is the trick. Ahead, the grand staircase, curving in a way that makes your chest lift without your permission. The balustrade flows under a palm, as if it were carved yesterday, because it was. The iron and glass dome above it bathes everyone on those steps in democratic radiance, even if democracy stops at the ticket office. A clock ticks, flanked by an allegorical figure in bronze, honor and glory crowning time. The ship believes in nouns rendered capital. Listen, silverware chiming a soft anticipatory music in the saloon, leather easing as gentlemen sit, the cough of a coal lighter far below, busy feeding the appetite that makes all this glamour hum. The orchestra tests a phrase. It hangs in the air like a vow. Rooms that argue with the ocean. Design here is not neutral. It is philosophy upholstered. The smoking room murmurs of England in oak and green leather. The reading and writing room sighs in pale paneling, as if Paris had been domesticated and set afloat. The à la carte restaurant promises that the Atlantic can be coaxed into courses, oyster and soma, sole Veronique, saddle of lamb. A candle flame watches its own reflection tremble in a wineglass and decides there is nothing dangerous in tremors. Even the corridors speak in complete sentences. Carpet underfoot edits the sound of footsteps until the ship seems to glide along the soles of your shoes. Brass shines to a moral point. Doors latch with the crisp assurance of a well-bred nod. Someone, somewhere, decided that fatigue should be given no edges to snag on. It isn't just wealth. It's worldview. If you can civilize a crossing, perhaps you can civilize the century. Second class, which is really first class last year. Open a door one deck down, and surprise lets itself in. Second class is not a euphemism here. It is aspiration delivered. Paneling, plain but graceful. Beds that do not fold out of walls like apologetic secrets. A library where a clerk can read a novel and briefly forget his ledger. On the promenade, the wind visits politely. You can taste salt without having it thrown in your face. In these spaces, modernity makes a quiet promise that comfort will trickle downward, that the future is a rising tide, and we are all conveniently ships. Third class, where the future squeezes its eyes against the brightness. Keep walking. Down. Past a different smell soap, stew, engine heat. The door opens on clean bunk rooms with whitewashed walls. Long tables. A piano that will work very hard by Thursday. These are not hovels. They are honest, scrubbable hopes. Here, the ship is a bridge. Voices tangle, Cork and Cork again, Sligo and Stockholm, Naples, Galway, County Mayo, some with English only newly unpacked in their mouths. Babies hold the air, like the first breath is a possession they suspect might be taken. Young men look toward the bow, as if the horizon might notice their determination and hasten to accommodate it. What would you have smelled? Yeast from fresh bread. Coal in the hair even after a washing. The faint starch of a shirt laid out for mourning. What would you have heard? A mother threatening a nursery of cousins with bedtime and then spoiling them with a song. A man counting the bills left in his pocket, and then counting again, because numbers feel more obedient the second time. A promenade where class rehearses its lines. Outside, the promenade deck stages a play in which spectators are also actors. First class circles the sun like a private planet. Parasols bloom, walking sticks punctuate sentences, wool suits pretend not to envy the Mediterranean. The chairs each tagged for a passenger by a deck steward with handwriting better than most signatures, tilt just so. Sea air opens lungs and appetites, the ship's most reliable salesman. Near the rail, a man tries a shy cough into his fist and decides it sounds professional. A bride lowers her eyes, not out of modesty, but to observe how her shoes behave on teak. A child counts whitecaps until numbers are too small to matter. Somewhere, a very rich person considers the sky and arrives at a conclusion that will be printed under his photograph in tomorrow's paper. You can be sentimental about this or skeptical. The ship shrugs and offers both readings. The service that makes magic look effortless. The true conjurers wear uniforms. A stewardess who remembers names faster than a telegram arrives. A page who never appears to run, only to have been always just where needed. A baker's crew setting loaves in serried ranks at dawn, so the day can tear their crusts at proper intervals. In the engine room, men with lamps watch pistons stroke, and crossheads gleam beauty, yes, but hot and loud, and so the beauty is private. We dwell on chandeliers and forget thermometers plunged into beef, gauges nudged into compliance, hands that learn the temperature of brass by touch. Luxury is a choreography of unseen corrections. If you want to understand why people trusted the ship, start here, in 1,000 small competences repeating themselves until trust feels like common sense. Technology, elegantly disguised. Look past the potted palms, and you'll notice other kinds of plants, steel wired like vines. The Marconi room crackles. Sparks of information leap between continents and dots and dashes. CQD, the old call, a newer one, SOS, promised to be understood even by panic. Operators, young and effortlessly modern, trade messages with shore stations and other liners, as if gossip itself had been electrified. Down below, boilers breathe. Steam wanders obediently through a forest of valves. Fans move air through guts of the ship that would otherwise feel like a mechanical underworld. The captain and officers on the bridge share a language of bearing and log, of telegraph clangs and semaphore flags. It all looks inevitable, like an orchestra looks inevitable when it has practiced enough to fool you into thinking music makes itself. We moderns love this part. It resembles us. It's worth remembering that systems, like servants, can be so good at their jobs, we forget they have limits. The ritual of departure that feels like coronation. Whistles answer whistles. Lines slap water. A cheer rises from the quay because cheering is the simplest way to be part of something too large for language. Hats are lifted. Handkerchiefs float like small, surrendering flags. The band on deck chooses something bright. The band below decks will choose something tender later, when the last of the goodbyes have been wrung out and rung again. Movement is slow at first. A floating city must consider its citizens' stomachs. But speed gathers as a kind of confidence. The docks widen into channel. The channel lets out into a road where only ships travel. You feel it, the slight, continuous persuasion underfoot that says you are embarked. And if you look back towards Southampton, it already looks like a memory rehearsing how it will be told. A staircase that teaches belief. Return, for a moment, to that grand staircase. People perform themselves here. A dowager, who has never hurried, insists on proving she can still descend without a hand. A man in an excellent coat becomes, as he steps down, his father's best story. Children learn a new acoustics for whispering. The dome overhead replies with day distilled into something theatrical. It's only a staircase, but it's also a thesis that civilization is a matter of curves taken at the proper speed, of light persuaded to flatter, of height made to feel like privilege rather than risk. When we later speak of hubris, some of us will picture this staircase, and it will not be entirely fair, and it will not be entirely wrong. Nights that edit themselves into legend. Dark comes soft, and then all at once, as sea dark always does. The ship discovers her reflection in the black water and decides to enjoy herself. Lamps write mathematics along the promenade. In the dining saloon, a low field of laughter moves from table to table just ahead of the soup. China sings. Knives and forks make a constellation of polite collisions. Somewhere a toast is uttered in a tone that promises time will be kind to its author. On the boat deck, breath turns briefly to smoke in the cooler air and then thinks better of it. You can hear the Atlantic thinking in swells, in slaps against the hull's black geometry. She doesn't sound curious yet. She sounds patient. This is the part of the story where we are most tempted to lean forward and warn them. But that would be rude. Besides, our warnings are never believed when the band knows its repertoire and the souffle holds. A quick note to you and me. Yes, we know what they don't. But look how the ship keeps its promises. Beds made, meals served, letters sent, children calmed, elders respected, 1,000 small rituals that say the world is steady. You and I live in cities that make identical promises every day. We call it reliability. They called it luxury. Different nouns, same lullaby. If history has a moral here, it's not, don't enjoy nice staircases. It's, remember that a good staircase does not repeal gravity. And so, to people, before we leave the palace to her well-lit assurances, let us admit the real reason anyone remembers her. Not wood, not brass, not steam, but lives layered like decks. A millionaire with a diamond the size of his certainty. A governess paid to look like calm. A boxer whose hands ache to be used for anything but shoveling coal. A young woman nursing a secret and a seat by a porthole. An engineer who will later choose to stay where the heat is cruelest because that is where the pumps live. They have all come aboard for different reasons and the same reason to cross. Past to future. Old world to new. Youth to whatever comes next. The palace offers them a smooth version of that passage, wrapped in music and menus and time told by bells. For now, it delivers. Chapter 4. Passengers of Fate. Morning goes gold across the promenade, the wind polite, the horizon, a line drawn with a steady hand. A ship is a city whose streets move, and its citizens learn quickly how to walk a world that glides beneath them. You could spend the entire crossing observing this city and never grow bored, a choreography of strangers orbiting an idea called arrival. But a ship is also a book, and every cabin a chapter. Let's open a few. The millionaire who collected mornings. He prefers the starboard promenade for its light. The coat is camel hair, the gait unhurried, the kind of unhurried that implies other people will hurry for him. He pauses at the rail with a coffee, whose heat confirms that efficiency below stairs functions like a law of nature. He is thinking of New York meetings, a luncheon at the club, a daughter whose smile keeps finding its way into his calendar in ways he had not planned. He loves the ship, not only for its comforts, but because it behaves like his favorite story about himself, that the world can be improved with the right application of capital and will. The grand staircase tells him he is right. The orchestra confirms the footnote. When he writes a letter in the afternoon to be wired ashore from the next stop, it will contain phrases like splendid accommodation and most civilized passage. He means them without irony. He glances down at the lifeboats once, not out of fear, but as one admires crown molding good, proper, there. The governess who counts. She counts children the way a helmsman counts degrees, with accuracy and quiet consequence. 2 wards, pale from a long winter, noses eager for sunlight. She buttons their coats, tucks wool at the wrist. The mother is gracious and imperious, and often elsewhere. The father can make a room bend to his timetable with a glance. The governess is the clock neither of them sees. She is paid to make safety look effortless. At night, after the boys have surrendered to sleep, she sits by the porthole and writes a letter she will not send, about how the sea looks like sheets still warm from an iron, and how the ship is teaching her, against her better judgment, to want a kind of life with afternoons that contain libraries. We won't pretend she is a heroine. She is something rarer, a professional doing a job well, a person whose competence is the difference between a good day and a frightening one. History seldom carves names for such people on stone. Perhaps it should. The boxer who keeps time with the engines. His hands are wrapped, not for a fight but because he believes in ritual. He is technically crew fireman, trimmer but off watch. He becomes a spectator with a private metronome. He feels the ship's heartbeat through his boots and matches it instinctively with the rhythm he learned on canvas. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The combinations a man builds when life feeds him repetition. In the stokehold, life is measured by shovels and sweat. The heat is the kind that scrubs your lungs with a wire brush. He will tell you, if you ask him later in a dockside pub, that the thing people don't understand about coal is its sound, soft break of it, the way a good shovel becomes a second mouth you breathe with. He respects the ship the way a fighter respects a ring, impartial, bounded, demanding the honesty of exertion. He grins in photographs because cameras still feel like magic. He has no use for magic otherwise. The young wife with a secret. She stands at the rail pretending to like the wind. In her pocket, a letter folded until it behaves. In her stomach, a question she has not asked aloud. If she turns her head this way, the horizon blurs. That way, it sharpens. She has a husband whom she loves and cannot yet read. He is kind. He is distracted by the future in a way that is both admirable and lonely for the person walking beside him toward it. She watches the ocean as if it might explain everything in a language large enough for her heart. It doesn't. Oceans prefer implication. But the ship gives her one gift she did not expect, time to rehearse courage. You can practice sentences on a promenade with more success than in a parlor, because the wind steals the drafts. The baker who believes in yeast more than luck. Down where the air is flour and heat, the baker runs a republic. His ovens are his parliament, his loaves, his legislation. He has calculated the appetites of 4 classes and speaks the language of crusts. Bread is the ship's most democratic joy, and he knows it. At 3 each morning, he begins to give the day its smell. At noon he leans in the door and watches just for a moment wealth peel back to the simple animal pleasures of tearing and buttering and making hunger vanish. He drinks very little. Later, when the world tips, we will meet him again. For now, let him be a craftsman whose miracles are mistaken for routine. The purser who files the city into order. Lists please him. Names lined like soldiers, currencies tamed into columns, complaints translated into solutions with the efficiency of magic tricks. A purser's job is to convince hundreds of overlapping needs that they can share space without drawing blood. He moves with the ease of a man who knows where the keys are, literally and metaphorically. If you lose something on a ship like this, you come to him not because policy demands it, but because you sense the world will rearrange itself in your favor within minutes of his attention. He speaks softly and carries a pencil. the captain who wears calm like a uniform. Edward John Smith's beard is the sort that makes children decide that Santa has taken a seasonal job. Nearing retirement, he has become a figure in whose presence panic is embarrassed to continue. He knows the sea as a series of conversations, with weather, with charts, with engines, with men. He prefers sentences that begin with, "Very well." A last command should be a kind of coronation. That is one of the reasons he is here. This ship is a crown laid on a career that has taught him more about steel, wind, and human nature than anyone suspects. He is not reckless. He is perhaps too fluent in competence to imagine the universe rehearsing catastrophe on a stage this well built. Before you judge him, check your pockets for similar fluencies. I have one or two of my own. On the bridge, he studies the horizon the way a librarian studies silence, grateful when it behaves, suspicious when it is too perfect. The first officer who errs on the side of tidy. William Murdoch's handwriting could instruct steel to behave. He likes things where they are supposed to be. He prefers checklists to declarations, and he understands that the difference between a near miss and a story no one tells often diminishes to inches and seconds. His men trust him not because he is popular, but because he is competent, which is better. He walks the bridge with the feline quiet of someone who occupies a role completely. If you shook the ship like a snow globe, he would land back on his feet exactly where the watch bill says he belongs. The wireless that never sleeps. In a cabin that hums, two young men share the modern urgency of message. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, names that sound like a law firm and act like a lifeline. Tap and listen. Tap and listen. Shore stations, other ships, commercial traffic, personal gossip. They are not merely sending words, they are maintaining the new nervous system of a world just learning how to be perpetually connected. It is a marvelous, exhausting privilege. The public adores the glamour of instantaneity. The purser adores the revenue. The operators adore, if not the hours, then the feeling that the future runs through their fingertips. If you have ever been young and entrusted with a new technology, you recognize the glittering fatigue in their eyes. The emigrants who carry a continent like a trunk. Third class spends the afternoons in futures. The children play games that understand nothing of oceans. The adults trade geographies like recipes, streets in New York, cousins in Hoboken, factory names, rumors about wages. They wear their best clothes because arrival is a performance you only get to give once. They have brought with them a narrow grammar of hope and enough doubt to keep it believable. On Sunday, they sing. Voices climb out of dialect and into chords old enough to make the ship listen. If you lean on the rail outside and close your eyes, the sound folds time so that you cannot tell whether it is 1912 or always. A woman who refuses to be unsinkable in silence. She is rich, yes, but that is an adjective, not a character. Margaret, everyone will call her Molly. Later, whether she likes it or not, moves through first-class spaces like a corrective. She laughs too loud for the carpet. She tips too well for the stewards to pretend not to adore her. And she has a habit that does not endear her to certain men. She notices working people as if they were people. When someone tells her the ship is unsinkable, she snorts in a way that suggests she has known many men who said similar things about themselves. Do not write her into legend yet. For now, let her be a woman with a spine that knows how to carry other people when their knees forget. Letters that will never be posted. There is a public mailroom aboard, sacks to be transferred in New York, a system whose confidence would impress a Prussian. But the letters that matter most are the ones folded into pockets, slid under pillows, tucked into the secret clefts of luggage. A man writes to a brother he has not forgiven. A mother writes to a child who will not remember her handwriting. A girl writes to herself as if she were a friend and promises to become the person that friend describes. The ship gathers these pages like a librarian who knows that the most important volumes never make the catalog. The sea, reading us back. In the evening, the ocean becomes velvet, then ink, then something that seems to absorb light rather than merely lack it. Passengers step out to drink cold air and consider themselves from the outside. The ship thrums, steady, satisfied, alive. Above, the sky shines with stars that look polished to within an inch of their immortality. Below, the Atlantic wears a face that sailors have always found suspicious, too calm, as if the ocean were holding its breath. You feel it too, don't you? The way stillness sometimes contains more story than motion. No, don't jump ahead. They don't know what you know, and the fairness of the tale requires that we honor their ignorance as a kind of innocence. For now, the city sleeps, or pretends to, and the engines continue their argument with distance. A small interruption in the palace's grammar. Just before midnight, on the second full day at sea, a message arrives, routine and faintly annoying, because there's one more pebble in a day that has already been a landslide of telegrams. Ice reported ahead. It is the sort of fact a modern ship collects the way a household collects errands, note, file, address. The wireless set never really cools. The bridge never really blinks. Somewhere in the chart room, a pencil makes a light mark, and a mind just as lightly moves a worry one shelf higher. You will want to ask, why didn't? We'll answer in the proper chapter. For now, attend to what this chapter has given you. Lives, ordinary and unalarmed, proceeding with the dignity of people who are simply trying to reach tomorrow. They will, many of them, be asked to become more than themselves. Some will comply. Some will astonish. Some will be forever reduced to a name on a list that makes strangers cry. Tonight, though tonight is for promenade and piano, for letters and loaves, for the quiet pride of a captain who prefers seas like polished marble and a crew that knows how to make a floating palace seem inevitable. Chapter 5. The Captain and the Warning. Dawn finds the bridge washed in a kind of pewter radiance, the horizon neat as a ruler's edge. The ship keeps time with herself, engines beating a pulse you can set your coffee to, bells marking the hours with the calm authority of a monastery. If you want to know what competence sounds like, stand near a wheelhouse on a quiet morning, murmurs, footfalls, the dry rustle of a chart being folded and refolded by hands that have long ago learned not to crease where it matters. Captain Edward John Smith steps to the wing and tastes the air the way old sailors do, as if weather had grown flavors. He prefers this cool, steady, mannerly seas. He could, if you asked, recite a lifetime of storms and shoals and nights when the wind sang the wrong hymns. Today, the Atlantic wears its best suit. If the sea can smile, it does. Down in the Marconi room, however, the future taps its impatient heel. Whispers in electricity. Wireless is an invention that behaves like gossip, irresistible, relentless, sometimes vital, often merely human. Telegrams arrive and depart in a clatter: bookings, compliments, business deals that cannot wait 5 days, a husband proving from the sea that he can still be everywhere at once. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, sleeves rolled, headphones glossy at their ears, keep pace with a world that has learned the trick of speaking across distance. Mid-morning, a message arrives from a steamer up ahead, plain as a posted sign: ice reported in your track. Coordinates, a courteous warning, a professional nod handed through the ether. The information goes to the bridge. The pencil moves to the chart tick, a small cross near a latitude that sounds like winter even when spoken in April. If you could see the chart table now, its neat geometry of rhumb lines and pencil annotations, you'd feel reassured. And that reassurance is the invisible character in this chapter. The grammar of calm. On the bridge, an almanac of habits. The officer of the watch, metronome steady. The quartermaster at the wheel, hands light, eyes heavy with that peculiar form of attention seasoned helmsmen wear, nothing and everything at once. The engine room telegraph stands like a polished oracle ahead, full its handle, a promise that will be obeyed across steel and heat and coal. Very well, says Smith, because very well is the correct answer to a sea that is behaving. The ocean impersonates a lake. Wind falls away until smoke rises from the funnels in vertical pillars, as if the ship were a factory anchored to the sky. This is worse than it looks, though most passengers would call it lovely. Calm water smooths itself into a sheet and conceals telltales. In a lively sea, ice betrays itself: white backs rolling, broken water, the sea's equivalent of barked shins. In this stillness, ice becomes a conspiracy between darkness and light. Do they know that? Of course they do. But knowledge is a coat, useful, protective, and we all have days when the weather seems so fair we leave it unbuttoned. Notes from the north. More warnings arrive. The Californian, the Mesaba, the Baltic. Each sends its small lantern into the day. Field ice, many bergs, packed to the south and west. If you've ever watched alerts accumulate on a screen and told yourself sensibly that you have context under control, you understand the bridge's psychology. The North Atlantic in April is a parish where ice is a familiar parishioner. Men of Smith's generation have threaded needles through berg fields without harm. The ship's route skirts, the hour shifts, the watch changes. Nothing dramatic, just seamanship being its usual unfussy self. Let me break the wall to ask, how many modern tragedies begin in the dull rhythm of routine executed well? Not in disobedience, but in obedience to the way things are usually done. This is not condemnation, it is caution. Good habits, left unexamined, can harden into blinders. The mathematics of distance. Up in first class, distance shortens deliciously. The promenade makes conversation easy, appetite easier. At lunch, someone speculates that they might perhaps arrive Tuesday night rather than Wednesday morning, an idle vanity more than a boast. No official attempt is being made at records. The engines are not being flogged. The boilers breathe at respectable, not ruinous, rates. Still, a captain has his pride, and a line has its rivals. Arriving handsomely has always been part of the performance. In the engine room, orders translate into heat. Stokers feed the furnaces in an economy of motion that would impress a choreographer Trimmers move coal where weight will behave. A chief engineer reads gauges like a physician, tuning the ship's metabolism. If you asked him about ice, he would say, with the weary good sense of a man whose domain is below the waterline, that physics pays little attention to adjectives like unsinkable, glass in the sun, glass at night. Afternoon delivers a light so generous, even second-class brass discovers it can pretend to be gold. Children collect it on their noses. Ladies collect it on the backs of their hands. Men collect it on the lenses of their spectacles and read their newspapers with a patience unavailable ashore. No one is looking for ice. Why would they? Ice, when it matters, is a nocturnal animal. At 5:50 p.m. Another message, this from the steamer America, reports Bergs. It goes to the bridge, is penciled, initialed. Dinner dresses are being considered upstairs. A pianist tests the soft pedal and decides the saloon can bear it. The ship changes clocks, as ships must when oceans insist. The day stretches itself like a cat and becomes evening. The ordinary heroism of paper. You picture heroism as loud. Sometimes it is neat. On the chart are positions, tiny crosses, the polite heraldry of danger reduced to graphite. The officer of the watch has conferred with the captain. Speed remains steady. The course laces a careful path. Look hard and you'll see something else, the quiet arrogance of excellent tools. Bulkheads, doors, pumps, searchlights. No, this ship carries none, for ice few do. Lookouts rely on eyes, not beams, and tonight those eyes will stand in a crow's nest sharpened by cold. Binoculars? Not on hand. A locker key has gone astray in a web of bureaucracy and small accidents that would be funny on another day. The lookouts will do what lookouts have always done: squint, trust, ring a bell if the ocean rearranges itself into a wall. We are not building an indictment. We are setting a table. The captain's round. Smith dines lightly, then walks. A captain must be seen, just as a city's mayor must be seen on market day. He passes through rooms where wealth pretends to be effortless, and rooms where effort is wealth. He notes without thinking the pitch and roll negligible, the wind a gentleman, the temperature dropping. On the bridge again at 9, he confers with First Officer Murdoch, who will have the middle watch. Ice has been reported. Keep sharp. Call me if in doubt. Very good, sir. It is the kind of exchange that happens 100,000 times without consequence. You and I want to crown it with foreshadowing. The men who spoke it crowned it with routine. The cold that edits breath. Up in the crow's nest, Fleet and Lee stamp their feet and slap their arms, the ritual mathematics of staying human inside a night that wants to make you an equation. The air bites. Your nose begins to feel like something you once borrowed from a stranger. The sea is so smooth it seems solid, not glass, something more patient. The sky throws diamonds carelessly, stars bright enough to hum. No moon. The worst kind of illumination, too much above, not enough below. They scan. Left to right, right to left. The ship slides, dignified, through geography the way a pen glides through a signature it has already practiced. Time on a night watch is elastic. 5 minutes can be an hour, a finger snap. The bell above them is a promise and an apology. The orchestra, the oars, The oaths. Down below, the band plays something fashionable, then something older to be funny about it. Couples negotiate a dance as treaties are negotiated, with high hopes arcing over familiar missteps. In third class, a fiddle goes at a jig until even the shy feet learn to risk. Bread has been torn. Tea has cooled. Children have been convinced to sleep. Somewhere a man swears that when he reaches New York he'll never see coal again. Somewhere else, a steward swears the opposite, that he was born to the sea and will die on it, but not today, and not for a long while. The ship is most beautiful at this hour, a moving city wearing a crown of lights. Seen from a distance, she is an argument for civilization. Seen from above, by indifferent stars, she is a child with a lantern. The last polite interruption. At 9:40 p. Memory. The messaba sends a long, precise list, great number bergs, large quantities of field ice. The message reaches the wireless room and waits its turn behind a drift of passenger traffic. Jack Phillips is doing exactly what he is paid to do: earn the line money, keep the queue moving, maintain the glamour of instantaneity. The mesaba's warning never makes it to the bridge. At 10:30 p. Mem. The nearby Californian calls, stopped, surrounded by ice. Phillips, still swamped with private traffic bound for Cape Race, snaps back, "Keep out, I am working Cape Race." Not rudeness, not villainy fatigue, and focus in a room that measures heroism in words per minute. We sometimes think history hinges on malice. Far more often, it hinges on human bandwidth. On the bridge, the night remains exemplary. The temperature falls another degree. Breath becomes punctuation in the air. A captain goes to bed, a ship goes on being a ship. Just before 10:00 p. Mr. Smith retires. He leaves a wheelhouse attended by men who have learned the alphabet of the sea in all capitals. He leaves a ship tuned to his preferences, serenely fast, impeccably managed, awake in the ways that matter. If the future could knock, it would be rude to do so now. Would you have slowed? Perhaps. Would I? Perhaps not. We flatter ourselves with hypotheticals because they let us escape the claustrophobia of a story already written. The truth is, competent men believe competent systems would keep them safe from the ordinary dangers of a familiar ocean. They were not wrong, in general. They were catastrophically wrong. In particular, the minute hand approaches. In the crow's nest, lookouts shift on their boards and lean forward, as if attention had weight they could throw against the dark. On the bridge, Murdoch stands with a body, awareness you only acquire when you have lived more hours on decks than on streets. In the wireless room, dots and dashes skip like stones across a black pond. In the engine room, coal moves, flames answer, steam obliges. In 1,000 beds, sleep performs its unnoticed rescue. At 11:39 p. Mem. The Atlantic holds its breath. At 11:40 p. More. A shape lifts itself out of blackness, a horizon that disobeys the horizon. A geometry that belongs to cliffs, not oceans. A bell rings once, twice, thrice. A telephone shouts the crow's nest's 3 words. Iceberg, right ahead. Everything that was routine becomes theater. Orders will volley with the speed of instinct. Steel will test the tolerances of human judgment. And time so polite, until now, will begin to behave like a stranger. Chapter 6. Collision. There are seconds in history that behave like glass, clear, brittle, and forever reflecting everything that comes after. 11:40 p.m. April 14. The ship is a lit inheritance, moving through a darkness so pure it seems deliberate. Then the horizon misbehaves. 3 bells in the crow's nest, urgent, clean, undeniable. The telephone snatches the same truth and spits it at the bridge. Iceberg, right ahead. The choreography of reflex. First Officer Murdoch does not think, he remembers. Hard a starboard, which, by the helm's convention, means turn the wheel to port to swing the bow to starboard. Full astern. The engine room telegraph clacks like a gavel as indicators snap from ahead to astern. Down below, men in heat that feels like an argument throw their weight into a new tempo, steam valves hissing in protest at a reversal not designed for elegance. Up top, the quartermaster hauls the wheel against its stops. The ship, enormous, begins to decide. The lookouts watch the night rearrange itself into cliff. Black on black, bulk against absence, no roar, only the indecency of height. The berg wears a jagged crown and a long, invisible beard beneath the surface. You want to crash, a cinematic violence to match the myth. What you get is worse, a long, low shh, like a breath drawn across a blade. Steel meets winter. The hull does not split, it is wounded. Plates along the starboard bow dimple inward, rivet heads pop with the dry crack of bone handled in a butcher's shop, seams open in stuttering segments. 6 compartments are touched more than the designer's arithmetic allows. Water behaves like a professional. It takes the invitation exactly as wide as it is given and proceeds. On the bridge, Murdoch orders the helm amidships, then a swing to port to try and clear the berg's invisible belly. The berg slides down the flank like a cold hand searching a pocket for patience. Ice grinds and tumbles onto the forward well deck with a sound like someone tipping a quarry into a bell. And then quiet. The ship breathes. The sea resumes the manners of a lake. If you had been standing in a first-class corridor, you might have felt only a tremor and laughed, the way people laugh when an elevator surprises them with a new floor. The arithmetic of water. Thomas Andrews arrives on the bridge as if summoned by the ship herself. Calm men speak quickly. The carpenter is sent to sound the well, the bosun to check forward compartments. Smith steps onto the wing, eyes narrowing in the old sailor's way, as if night could be forced to confess. Reports return like stones dropped in a bucket. For peak flooding. No. 1 hold flooding. No. 2 and 3 holds taking water. Boiler room. 6. Water up to the plates. The ship's body, previously a theorem, is now a ledger listing debts. In the mailroom, clerks stand knee-deep, then thigh-deep, clutching sacks that are suddenly very realistic about the phrase dead letter office. In the squash court, a dry echo becomes a cold slap. In the lower corridors, the carpet darkens along its edges, an ink line creeping with tidy malice. Andrews sketches in his head what the Atlantic has just written in the hull. 5 compartments would have kept her afloat. 6 will not. He tells the captain quietly. There is no melodrama. She will sink, he says, adding the mercy of a guess. An hour and a half, perhaps 2. You have been told all your life that competent men cannot be surprised like this. Watch their faces now, no panic, just the gravity of those who learn a verdict they must carry to everyone else. The ship pretends to be fine. On D-deck, a steward straightens a vase, because stewards straighten vases. In the smoking room, a gentleman plucks a chip of ice from the carpet and holds it up like a souvenir. Laughter has a special tone when it is employed against discomfort. You can hear it in a dozen lounges at once. Couples rise, lean toward windows that reflect them back, lovely people, slightly distorted by glass and certainty. In steerage, someone has heard the hull's long whisper in an idiom older than class. A mother ties a shawl tighter and counts her children for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. A young man touches the bulkhead and feels the chill travel through his hand and into his stomach, where it blooms into decision. Find the stairs. Crew go about their duties, because duties are the strongest medicine humans have against fear. A few use humor the way a window uses lace, to distract the eye from the view. Most simply work. Orders given in sentences shorter than fear. Seal the watertight doors. Electric switches thrown, steel bites down. Men step through openings that, moments ago, were corridors and are now margins. A fireman stumbles and is dragged by 2 friends, because that is what friends do, even in rooms where the air bites back. Rouse the lifeboat crews. The bosun's call peals through the cold, a bird cry that turns corridors into vectors. Men's hands find ropes, blocks, cranks. Canvas rubs against canvas like animals in stalls, impatient to become purpose. Passengers to muster with lifebelts. Stewards with voices trained for reassurance knock at doors. Just as a precaution, madam. Wrap up warmly, sir. Bring your coat, miss. Lifebelts crackle with that peculiar brittle sound cork makes when it has been too long in a cupboard. Bells mark the half hour. Time behaves like a joke you don't get until later. The letter and the ladder. In the Marconi room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride switch their lives to uppercase. CQD goes out, the old call, SOS joins it, the new one, because clarity loves redundancy when dying is on the line. Coordinates checked, rechecked. Nearby ships answer from their own darkness, some close, some too far. The Carpathia, unexpectedly within reach, turns like a dog hearing its name and begins to run. The Californian, nearer, sleeps under a bridge where a wireless set has been allowed to fall quiet. The operators keep tapping. If you have ever worked past exhaustion for a cause that cannot see your face, you know the shape of their hands now. On the boat deck, tarps come off with a sound like cloth remembering wind. Crews swing davits out, ropes squeal, pulleys complain. Frost laces breath into temporary ghosts. Politeness steps into cold air. Passengers emerge on deck with expressions reserved for fire drills and gossip. The stars are so bright, the scene looks staged. Someone remarks that the night is too beautiful to waste. Someone else remarks, with English aplomb, that the lifebelts are rather unbecoming. Fur coats arrive over silk, caps over hair that has conditions about wind, shawls over shoulders that have lived more boats on rivers than ships on oceans. Class, the play that never ends, tries to continue the performance. Officers, respectful, ask rather than command. Men defer, holding back because to hurry would be inelegant. Couples negotiate a little pantomime of chivalry without yet believing that it has an unscripted third act. Stewards shepherd third-class families forward, the geometry of ship design becoming the geometry of fate, narrow corridors, ship gates, stairwells that prefer those who know their turns. Some barriers open with keys, some with kindness, some, too many, only after minutes mislaid. We are tempted to indict the entire species here. Hold that thought. There is bravery brewing next to selfishness, and the heat for both comes from the same human furnace. The list, the tilt, the truth. At first it's a rumor the floor tells the foot, a list to starboard so gentle you can call it imagination. Then glasses slide. Then someone reaches for a handrail not because it is decor, but because gravity insists. Cold walks up ankles. In the bow, the sea finally permits itself a voice, the lap and gulp and hiss you hear when a bath is overfilled, translated into something with weight. Andrews moves like a gentleman in a play, teaching as he passes. Lifebelts put on like this. Boats take women and children first. Yes, the compartments are closed. No, not beyond D-deck. He is calm with the calm that chooses its exit valiantly. Captain Smith stands with that stillness old sailors practice for decades, the body composed so that others can borrow its posture. Orders leave his mouth in a grammar of inevitability. Lights will burn, pumps will work, boats will be swung out and filled. He tells the bandmaster to keep the music going because music is a staircase some souls need in order to reach courage. The band nods and chooses something with spine. Wood, rope, and arithmetic. Boats come to the rail like punctuation. Each has a number, a capacity, a destiny. Officers stand with lists in their heads. Who, how many, when. Revolvers appear, not waved but present, the way a gavel attends a courtroom. Women and children first. The phrase has cadence. People try to obey its music. Here is the cruel math. Space for barely half aboard. Not because of malice, because regulations measured lifeboats by tonnage and tradition was thrifty. Also cruel, boats lowered cautiously, half full at first because the gap between deck and sea seems like ridicule for overconfidence, and because no one quite believes the ship is doing what the cold insists it is. A young officer pleads. Please, ladies. A few step in, as if trying a new piano stool, carefully, with composure that hopes to become reality. A child is lifted, protests swallowed by a blanket. A husband accepts the performance that says he will come in the next boat, and he nods because love prefers fictions that preserve dignity. If you're angry at them for these courtesies, aim your anger also at the part of yourself that has ever been slow to rename an emergency. Small theaters of soul. On the starboard side, a woman refuses to enter a boat without her dog. She is refused. She does not weep. She leaves a hand on the animal's head, a benediction condensed to seconds. On the port side, a stoker face lettered in soot stands back to make room for a nurse whose eyes are learning a new kind of professional. In third class, a priest gathers a knot of passengers into a prayer that wraps them in words they understand better than orders. The bosun curses the knot in a fall and then kisses his palm because the rope relents, and now is not the time to be proud. Margaret Brown, no nickname, yet helps hand women in as if this were a picnic with logistics. Her voice does what voices can, It makes action feel contagious. Some refuse, of course they do. Fear hates separation. Some insist, of course they do. Love hates it more. Below, the loyalty of fire. In the boiler rooms, men who have been told the ship is doomed keep the pumps alive. Valves wheeze. Pistons thrust. Water, arrogant, discovers it still can be delayed. Hours are minted down here, paid for with breath. One by one, bulkheads taste Atlantic and flavor the air with a salt that stings. A chief engineer puts his hand to a pipe and nods, still warm enough, still worth it, then moves on, because a circuit of inspection is a liturgy, and liturgies are how some men speak to God. No cameras visit. Remember them anyway. Music against mathematics. The band chooses hymns that behave like blankets and waltzes that pretend nothing is wrong. Autumn. Son d'automne. Later, someone will insist they played Nearer, My God, to Thee. Memory loves a good line. I'll tell you this instead. They played what people needed to hear, and if God was nearer, it was because courage had tuned its ear. Listen to the strings try to smooth the edges of the night, while davits creak and cries pierce, and the sea begins to take back every adjective the ship wore so handsomely at dinner. A glance toward the edge of midnight. By now, the bow is lower, measurably. Chains sing softly where they touch the sea. The angle is enough that walking has become a choice rather than a reflex. Your breath draws shapes you can see. The stars watch, unhelpful and gorgeous. On the bridge, Smith stands at the rail and looks into a dark that refuses to answer questions quickly. He has made the right calls as far as a human can. Boats out, signals sent, pumps working, calm maintained. He is an old man at last, not because of age, but because leadership is a kind of age you wear when the world refuses to obey. In the wireless room, Jack Phillips keeps tapping as if time itself were a wire that could be persuaded by rhythm. You and I are desperate to run ahead. The story wants to be punctual. Let it be. Catastrophe, like sunrise, arrives on its own schedule. The ship is not yet poetry. She is still prose, argued line by line against the Atlantic's edits. But the edits are speeding up. Chapter 7. The night the sea took its due. Midnight tastes of iron and frost. The bow is down subtly at first, then undeniably. On deck, the air has that brittle quality that makes laughter sound like it might crack. The ship, still lit like a theater, has begun its second act, confusion staged as routine. Denial in evening dress. A man in white tie adjusts his cufflinks against a wind that refuses to applaud. A precaution, that's all, he tells his wife, his voice pitched to that register designed to talk children, and storms out of their tantrums. Nearby, a teenager marvels at the brightness of the stars and pockets a sliver of ice fallen from a davit, as if it were a souvenir. People keep walking because walking is an argument against fear. It works, almost. Below, in the corridors where the carpet has learned to drink, stewards knock in a rhythm that suggests good news. Lifebelts on, please. Wrap up warmly. Doors open on sleepy faces. Doors close on whispered arguments. The list to starboard becomes an etiquette. Hold the rail, mind your step, pretend you always meant to lean. The boats, wood, rope, arithmetic. The davits squeal as they swing out metal, learning cold. Tarps come off with a sigh. Lines pay out reluctantly, as if they've decided their job description didn't include this. There is a number stenciled on every boat and a number stamped in every officer's head. Capacity 65. Tonight those numbers will not meet often enough. Women and children first. It is a sentence with its own gravity. People try to obey. Resistance stirs where love lives. Husbands murmur, "Next boat, darling." Some wives murmur back, "We'll go together." A child is lifted, protesting not the cold but the separation. An officer bows with a revolver at his hip and a voice that tries to be velvet. "Please, madam." Boats lower half full at first, belief heavier than bodies. The gap between deck and sea looks like an accusation. The ship, after all, is still warm, still bright, still saying stay with all the confidence of wood polished this week. The band's defiant grammar. Music stands its ground. Ragtime at first, something springy, almost saucy, as if cheerfulness could be stapled over the hole where certainty used to be. Then hymns, not a sermon, just the memory of one. Passengers draw closer to that sound, the way winter people draw closer to windows that face the sun. Autumn. Songe d'automne. If they played "Nearer, my God, to Thee," it wasn't to be famous later. It was because some melodies behave like hands you can hold. Listen to the strings weaving poise into panic, buying order one bar at a time. Below, the loyalty of fire. In the boiler rooms, men keep the pumps alive because someone must. Heat roars. Water claps at steel with a butcher's confidence. Grease smokes, breath scalds, boots slip and catch and slip again. A chief engineer touches a pipe and nods, still warm, and moves on. Heroism doesn't pose down here, it turns valves. Each minute they win, climbs the ladders, and becomes another boat in the falls, another breath for the telegraphy, another chance for courage to multiply. Third-class geometry. Below the palace decks, the route to daylight zigzags through a puzzle of corridors and gates meant for order in ordinary times. Tonight, ordinary is useless. Stewards lead knots of families like shepherds who know the hillside. Some barriers open, some delay, some don't hear the keys soon enough. A young man in a cap carries two children who are not his and becomes, briefly, older than his father. A woman whose English is mostly hands reads the way the deck tilts and chooses the correct door by instinct. If you're looking for villains, you'll find a few. If you're looking for saints, you'll find more than you expected. Most are just people picking a direction and hoping it is up. Molly refuses to be ornamental. Margaret Brown. Molly. By public insistence, does the thing certain women do when men hesitate, she organizes. Over you go, sweetheart. To a woman paralyzed by etiquette. You too. To a girl brave until the last step. She puts blankets around shoulders and common sense into sentences. When a boat looks too empty, she raises a voice designed for parties and makes it carry work instead. Class blurs under breath that smokes. A duchess and a laundress both discover that wool smells the same when it is wet. Rituals that break your heart. A mother kisses her son's hair, hands him to a sailor, and stares at her empty arms as if someone has stolen the map inside them. A pair of newlyweds negotiate a goodbye with sentences they never rehearsed. A man who has always tipped well tips a crewman with his wedding ring and says, "For luck." As if luck were something you could pay forward at the rail. In steerage, a priest lifts his hands, and Latin finds its audience among accents that don't need the words to understand what they mean. On the boat deck, a stewardess tightens a lifebelt on a woman who has done everything right her entire life and is startled to find that rightness has no clause for this. Orders against entropy. The bridge holds its poise. Rockets go up white stars, sketching pleas into a sky already full of them. The wireless spits urgency into the dark. Answers come back: distance, course, hope. Carpathia is running. The Californian closer sleeps. Time, that excellent bureaucrat, stamps forms without looking up. Keep the lights burning. They do. Keep the pumps going. They do. Keep lowering. Ropes play out, block by block, argument by argument, until another small craft meets black water with a slap and pulls away, its oars a metronome for survival. The water learns their names. The Atlantic is not theatrical. It is 28 degrees farce, and therefore surgical. Hands lose their country, first numb, then mute, then gone. Breath shortens to coins you must spend sparingly. Voices thin. Oars creak. The ship's hull, immense and lit, now looks like a city retreating over a hill. From the boats, survivors watch windows flicker and think absurdly that someone has turned down lamps for the night. On deck, the angle grows. People begin to move differently, on all fours, with the slow care of children, with the suddenness of those who have delayed too long. The bow buries itself deeper, chains hum, water curls over the name on the prow and pronounces it without romance. The politeness expires. Half empty becomes full. Officers stop asking and start commanding. A shot barks a warning, not a sentence, and the crowd listens because the sound is older than language. A man tries to climb into a boat already lowering. Half a dozen hands put him back on deck with a fierceness that needs no villainy to be true. Another man refuses a seat he could have taken easily and steps back into history. Women argue to stay. Some are overruled by love that refuses their bravery. Go, a husband says, not like a gentleman, but like a man who has counted the minutes and found none to spare. The band's last bargain. Music leans into hymns now. Not because piety sells, but because melody is the only staircase left that some can climb. A cellist's fingers, stiffening, still find the string. A violinist leans his cheek against wood, as if the instrument were a person. They do not dramatize. They play. When memory later fights about which tune ended the world, forgive it. What matters is that notes outlasted several certainties. The cold closes its hand. Inside the boats, a woman tries to hush a baby whose cheeks have turned the wrong color. Another rows not well, but with the endurance you find only when there is no one else to do it. A sailor tells his crew they will come back, and his voice is both truth and anesthesia. No one in these boats is thinking about history. They are thinking about fingers, about oars, about the geography of breath. Back on deck, Captain Smith moves through the ship like a benediction. Be British. Some will claim he said, maybe he said simply, do your best. He checks the boats, the pumps, the men, and then is gone into the dark in a way that lets people decide how to remember him. Thomas Andrews is seen last in the smoking room, not smoking, not sitting, only insisting to a steward that life jackets be worn inside out so the kapok keeps faces above water. He has been teaching since the collision. He doesn't stop now. A clock that will not be negotiated with. By 1:30 a.m. The tilt is a fact you can lean each sentence against. By 1:45, the well deck tastes Atlantic. By 2:00, the forward funnel leans like a tired man and lets go. Its fall tears boats, snaps lines, hurls a wind that hauls people across decks like punctuation. The ship groans a metal sound, but it registers as something alive refusing a command. The last boats pull away, some bravely overfull, some heartbreakingly not. The band stops, not because courage has ended, but because physics has. The lights flicker, rally, flicker again. Someone reaches for a hand. Someone offers one. Some miss. At 2:17 a.m., the electricity fails. Darkness arrives, like a verdict. From the boats, a single sound rises, human voices, braided into a rope you cannot bear to hear twice. The cold takes them, one by one, until the night is only water and stars, and the clean, indifferent noise of oars. This is the part people skip in retellings, the long minute when the sea finishes its homework.